So we're here today to celebrate an achievement. After years of community investment in working on the next evolution or the next generation of the standards that underpin sustainable product development in the EPEAT eco label, we have achieved that. The updated criteria are complete. This is not a GEC or Global Electronics Council achievement. This is a community achievement. We're going to celebrate and talk about that today. There is a reality of when this is being delivered. The world is changing in all sorts of different ways, and we're going to dive into that as well and talk about the implications of the changing environment. So I'm excited to talk about this today. We've got a great slate of speakers. I'm going to give a bit of an intro here on this achievement and where we see things going. So why don't we go to the next slide? So first, let's talk about EPEAT, right? I'm not here to talk about Global Electronics Council more broadly. There are lots of things that GEC does. EPEAT is one of our main engines for making change and living into our vision of 100% sustainable electronics by 2050. And there are some words here to the side that I think exemplify the EPEAT brand. And we're going to talk about those in the coming slides, but I'll read them out here. First, global, trusted, and impact driven. And we're going to get into what those mean and some of the evidence behind each of those. But first, let's go to the next slide. Okay, let's talk about U.S. federal procurement. This is the proverbial elephant in the room. There have been changes in federal sustainable procurement, and specifically as it relates to the FAR. As you know, EPEAT is recognized by the EPA's recommendations for specification standards and eco labels as the only multi-attribute eco label for electronics. So we were definitely surprised and somewhat alarmed when we saw that in February 2025, the U.S. Civilian Agency Acquisition Council published a letter which authorized federal agencies to issue what's called a FAR class deviation, which, among other things, at least temporarily struck the requirement to procure products meeting EPA's recommendations of specifications, standards, and eco labels. Effectively, it suspended the requirements around sustainable procurement and those specifically related to EPA's recommendations. So that's what we know. How far and why those FAR class deviations have been adopted by the U.S. agencies is something we're continuing to learn. However, we are aware of things that it is not. So first, it does not prevent agencies from purchasing EPEAT registered products. It does not require them to any longer, at least in the current state, as long as those deviations are in place. But it doesn't prevent them from actually purchasing those or specifying that they would like to. It just doesn't require them. It also doesn't permanently change the federal acquisition regulation. The language of the FAR still is very much intact. Whether or not there is a FAR case to change that is something we will continue to monitor, as I'm sure many of you will as well. But if that FAR case doesn't come to be, or the language around the EPA recommendations doesn't change in the FAR, then it's quite possible that this could survive administrations and the requirements that are still in the FAR could continue to be relevant and important for years to come. And in addition to that, the FAR class deviations may not impact existing contracts with 6 months or left in their period of performance. So what that means is if EPEAT is listed as preferred or required for a contract that has 6 months or less left in their period of performance, there's a strong probability that this FAR class deviation would not affect that. We can't say that with 100% confidence, but from what we've heard, it's probable. There's quite a bit of knowledge that we're still continuing to gather. We think it's important not necessarily just to focus on the U.S. federal space. It's important, of course, but to ensure that we take a broader lens, right? And we apply that and look at the global community and the global demand for sustainable products, especially in the technology space. I think it was Mark Twain that once said, "Rumors of my demise are greatly exaggerated." And we feel very much that way here at GEC as it relates to EPEAT when we get questions around, okay, well, the federal agencies are, at least at this point, not requiring EPEAT registered products because of these FAR class deviations. That must mean that EPEAT doesn't have market value. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth. And we're going to talk to you about that today. not only how the value of EPEAT is extended past the U.S. federal space, not only in the U.S., North America, but in other regions of the world in a quite significant manner. Also, what we're seeing in terms of the growth of different types of demand, as it relates to not only traditional public purchasers, but other types of purchasers, investors, and other stakeholders out there in the world. So let's go to the next slide and we can begin to expand our lens a bit more and take a look at global sustainable procurement and how it's evolving. So number one, again, thinking about the bigger context, sustainable procurement is very much intact in US states and the private sector. In fact, we just got good message this week that the state of Maryland, very close to where I sit in Washington, D.C., just set a preference for EPEAT Climate Plus products in their purchasing standards. And so it's an example, this just happened last week, right? And so that the state of Maryland joins many other US states in requiring either EPEAT or EPEAT Climate Plus products or preferring them within the procurement contracts. The same is true in the private sector. If you look at healthcare as an example in the US, there are companies that continue to specify EPEAT as another example. So in the US, the states and private sector continue to move forward with sustainable procurement and EPEAT specifically. Now, more broadly around the world, we've seen sustainable procurement growing in new regions and countries. Australia, Southeast Asia, Latin America, Africa as examples. And again, seeing EPEAT within those procurement frameworks. Type 1 eco-labels are also poised to be a requirement for credible green claims in the European Union. That makes it even more important for companies that want to make green claims within that region to be investing in Type 1 eco-labels like EPEAT. And we're going to learn more about that in the policy section of this presentation. Our eco-label EPEAT has been adopted globally either as a requirement or a preference in major market countries across the globe. We're going to take a look at an example of that in here in just a moment. And provides the largest catalog of registered products of any electronics eco-label out there for the purchasers to select from. That's an important aspect as well. And finally, talking to investors, world development organizations like the World Bank, retailers, other key stakeholder groups have adopted EPEAT within their purview, within either their requirements or their recommendations to drive sustainable technology as well. So we see this all over the world. We're looking forward to continue to show that to you. I'm going to go on to the next slide now, just to remind us that, again, we're going to go through global, we're going to go through trusted and impact driven, just to get a sense of what we mean by those words and what's behind it. So let's move to the next slide. So first, global. Where do EPEAT sales come from? I'll start first with a factoid that only 8% of the EPEAT registered products that were put on the market in the last year were placed on the market in the US federal market. The rest came from rest of world, ROW is what we use internally as an acronym. This slide shows countries with over $1 billion in annual EPEAT sales. And you can see obviously the US is here, but that also encompasses states as well as private sector. But then there's a variety of different EU member nations. There's the UK, in Asia, China, India, Japan, Australia, of course, and Brazil and Latin America. So you can see that there are a high amount of sales worldwide, and not just within the US, but other countries, and we see that continuing to grow. EPEAT is also trusted around the globe. So manufacturers, purchasers, supply chain partners, sustainability advocates, those that set government policy. It is a well-trusted eco-label as it relates to sustainable technology. What I've got here on the screen is just one example of that. So this represents the EPEAT Purchaser Award winners in 2024. And this program is meant to recognize those purchasers who specify EPEAT products across multiple categories. And as you can see, and I won't read these off, it's a bit of an eye chart, but these are global buyers from all over the world that not only place purchasing requirements in those purchasing instruments, but specify EPEAT and or EPEAT Climate Plus across multiple product categories and pursue the award related to these. And so it's a great example of many that we can bring to bear of not only how much we're trusted as an eco-label specifically to be able to identify sustainable products, but purchasers wanting to have the opportunity to showcase their commitment to sustainable technology through the lens of EPEAT and GEC as well. So we're really proud of this program, very excited to work with the EPEAT Purchaser Award winners and all those other purchasers out there in the world that may not participate in the program, but are also specifically referencing EPEAT, and we hope to pull them into the program, the award program as well soon. So let's go to the next slide and we can talk about the final aspect that we brought up around EPEAT, which is impact driven. So let's go to the next slide. So impact driven. Not a lot of nonprofits out there can actually quantify the impact of the vehicles, programs, and people that make up their organization. I'm proud to say the Global Electronics Council and EPEAT, the EPEAT eco-labeling program, have been doing this for quite a while. Been able to help purchasers and manufacturers and other stakeholders around the world make a number of different impacts, tangible impacts that are defensible. We have data scientists and experts in GEC who built a set of calculators that are online that allow purchasers and manufacturers to calculate their impacts for using EPEAT. And if you look at these in aggregate or in a cumulative manner from the inception of EPEAT, these are pretty striking numbers. 2.7 billion plus sustainable products purchased through EPEAT, over 341 million metric tons of greenhouse gases reduced, over 803 million megawatt hours of energy saved, and over $34 billion US in cost savings. So pretty remarkable in terms of not only driving that impact, but being able to measure it and rounding out what we believe are the attributes of EPEAT that really make it something that we're excited to continue to bring to market. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, let's take a quick look at our agenda because I think this is what we've all been waiting for. Erica Turek is going to take us into looking at the next generation EPEAT criteria, what it means for sustainable product development and purchasers and investors and others worldwide. We have a special procurement guest, Stephanie Leclerc from McGill University, who's going to give the perspective of the procurement community on these new criteria. And we'll have some policy insights. This is going to be a new angle for GEC, and you can expect to see additional policy webinars coming up as well, how EPEAT fits into the policy landscape and benefits organizations in the system. We'll follow that with a special manufacturing guest, Scott O'Connell from Dell, to give the brand perspective on the new updated criteria and what it means for the industry. And then we'll have dialogue on next steps in EPEAT for manufacturers, suppliers, and purchasers from Kaushik Ramakrishnan, and we'll end it with some Q&A. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Erica Turek, our Senior Director of Criteria Development. Thank you, Erica.
Fantastic. Bob, that was great. Thank you. I'm really thrilled to be here with everyone today. I want to begin with saying a huge thank you to the many stakeholders that you see on this slide and others that contributed to the development of the criteria. It is the collective contributions of these many experts to a balanced voluntary consensus process that enabled its success. Could not do this without them. Next slide, please. So first, before diving into some details about the new criteria, I wanted to kind of set the stage on how the next generation of EP criteria are transformational for sustainability leadership. So first, the new criteria are horizontal, meaning they are applicable across ICT product categories. And this is going to be great for streamlining conformance processes, which is good for manufacturers and CABs, conformity assurance bodies in particular. But it's also a real benefit for purchasers that are interested in the details of which criteria are met by which products. It's also going to streamline the addition of new product types, expanding sustainability impact and driving mission even further over time. Second, The new criteria are focused on priority sustainability issues specific to electronic products, including climate, circularity, chemicals, and responsible supply chains. And we'll dive into each one of those a little bit more. And there is an increased focus on supply chain, where sustainability risks, both environment and social, are priorities. Everything from reducing greenhouse gas emissions upstream to prohibiting the use of forced labor. Next, the criteria address both product and manufacturing sustainability considerations. And they also promote manufacturer transparency and commitments. And this too applies to both environment and social risks. And I'll highlight some examples in coming slides. And finally, the revised criteria really raise the bar, increasing ambition across all 4 sustainability impact areas. And in doing so, the market leaders, some of whom we're going to hear from on this call, are raising all boats towards higher levels of collective sustainability performance and market transformation. Next slide, please. Great, thanks. So here you see the 4 sustainability impact topical areas that I mentioned and examples of types of criteria within each. So just quickly, the climate criteria address life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. The circularity criteria really strive to reduce raw material extraction by increasing reused and recycled content and by keeping products in operation for as long as possible through factors such as designing products for repair and reuse. And once products do ultimately reach end of life, there are criteria to address responsible materials recovery. And circularity, or we call it sustainable use of resources, the criteria also address water stewardship. The chemicals of concern criteria reduce toxics in both manufacturing and products. And the responsible supply chains criteria address labor, worker health and safety, responsible mineral sourcing, and environmental management systems. Next slide, please. Great. So a little bit about the process. The process for developing the criteria is absolutely foundational to its success. Our process aligns with ISO 14024 for type 1 ecolabels, and Catherine is going to speak further on this in coming slides. It also aligns with OMB Circular A119 in the United States. The process starts with foundational state of sustainability research that serves as the science evidence-based foundation. We then draft criteria drawing from multiple sources of best practices. We then vet the criteria with experts. And then following that, we deliver a full draft criteria document to what we call a technical committee. And we partner with NSF International, who administers the technical committee on our behalf. That's the green box that you see there on the slide. The things in blue are things that GEC is doing, and the green box there, NSF manages for us. NSF is known for their work on sustainability standards, and we really appreciate their leadership in standards development. And this TC serves as the balanced voluntary consensus decision-making body with participation from the stakeholders you see on this slide, including brands, other industries, civil society, and purchasers. And they deliberate at length the draft criteria. They push and they pull, and ultimately they work towards consensus. And for those on the phone involved in this, you know firsthand that it isn't easy, but it leads to better outcomes. Next slide, please. There we go. So this is a favorite slide of mine, as it shows how EPEAT has raised the bar over the years. For example, in the early years, EPEAT addressed product energy efficiency and fluorinated greenhouse gases. Today, EPEAT still addresses those topics, but has also added manufacturing energy efficiency, use of renewable electricity, and greenhouse gas reduction targets. Similarly, EPEAT has addressed recycled plastic content, designed for recycling and responsible end of life since the beginning. But today, EPEAT further addresses other recycled content materials, product longevity, durability, secure data deletion. And with respect to chemicals, EPEAT used to focus on heavy metals, still does, but today also addresses brominated chlorinated substances, phthalates, PFAS, greater supply chain management, and manufacturing process chemicals. And then additionally, really notable is in the early days, EPEAT was a multi-attribute environmental eco-label only. It did not include social criteria. And today, EPEAT is a multi-attribute sustainability eco-label, is what I like to say, also addressing fair labor, worker health and safety, and responsible mineral sourcing. And so now I'm going to highlight a few key items in each sustainability impact category. I won't describe every single criterion, not enough time, but I'd like to highlight a few key items that are new and unique. Here we go. So beginning with climate. The updated criteria, you'll note, have very much an increased focus on supply chain decarbonization, particularly upstream, which is a hotspot for life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. You can see the quote here, the WEF, the World Economic Forum, estimates that 77% of total GHG emissions from the electronics industry are due to supply chain activities. This is particularly true for portable products. And to avert the most catastrophic consequences of climate change, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has said that we must have global emissions by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050. And the updated EP criteria require the establishment of GHG reduction goals aligned with this best available climate science. So it's inclusive of scopes 1, 2, and parts of scope 3. Scope 3 being the supply chain. Let's see. The revised criteria also award implementation of best practices for reducing GHG emissions, which are the highest, including, for example, integrated circuits and flat panel manufacturing. And these strategies, which are shown here on the slide, include energy management through implementation of ISO 50001 and use of renewable electricity. So the circularity criteria are also moving the bar in many ways. Today, I'd like to highlight the reused and recycled content criteria. So these criteria require minimum uses or incorporation of reused and or recycled post-consumer plastic content into products, not just disclosure. And they also award incorporation of higher levels of post-consumer plastic content and expand EP criteria to also address recycled content-based metals, critical minerals, and rare earth elements. And the chemicals criteria are also really exciting as they set a new sustainability leadership standard. I'm going to highlight two new items, PFAS and manufacturing process chemicals. So first, perfluoroalkylated substances, or PFASs, known as forever chemicals for their toxicity and persistence in the environment. These criteria have three key elements: inventory, restriction, and alternatives assessment. So first, there's a requirement to inventory PFASs used in products, leveraging at a minimum the IEC 62474 Material Declaration Standard. Second, there are also provisions to restrict the use of PFAS in products, plastic components, and in packaging. And then third, there are criteria to implement alternatives assessment to prevent regrettable substitutions. The manufacturing process chemicals criteria reduce use of high priority hazardous chemicals, and then they also work to further enhance availability of process chemical information through increased levels of reporting. And then one more quick thing, it's not on this slide, but also kind of new and unique is a criterion for assessing chemicals used in materials with prolonged skin contact. And so, in concluding with the revised criteria for responsible supply chains, I'm highlighting two areas: labor and OSH, occupational health and safety, and responsible mineral sourcing. So some really key changes. The updated criteria require manufacturer and supplier codes of conduct aligned with ILO fundamental conventions and hence also aligned with RBA standards. They require risk assessment to identify higher risk prioritized facilities. auditing of priority manufacturer and supplier facilities, and then public reporting of audit results. And this includes reporting on a summary of the audits that have been done, the nonconformances, and the corrective actions. And then the criteria further incentivize market transformation through increased transparency around enhanced reporting, for example, disclosure of actual supplier facilities audited, increased worker engagement, not just in audits, but also disclosure of how worker grievances are addressed, and then development of living wage assessments and gap closure plans. And begins with prioritizing higher risk areas, including manual assembly and back-end chip manufacturing. And then with respect to responsible mineral sourcing, the updated criteria have raised the bar by requiring public disclosure and use of smelters and refiners that participate in a validated 3TG, tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold, responsible mineral sourcing program. And these are programs that are aligned with the OECD due diligence guidance for responsible supply chains of minerals from conflict affected and high risk areas. And then the criteria incentivize action beyond 3TG with inclusion of cobalt. So really excited about this new criteria and working with all of you. And so Bob, back to you.
All right, thank you, Erica. So again, excited about the new criteria just coming out in February, active in November. We'll hear more about that from Susan Herbert later. But Erica, thanks for the overview. Next up, we have Stephanie Leclerc from McGill University. Of course, it's important for us to have purchasers deep in the process of developing these criteria, but also rolling them out and understanding the perspective from the procurement community. So with that, Stephanie, looking forward to your remarks. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Bob. I wanted to start and say that I share Erica's excitement. Thank you. Happy to be there and be invited at this webinar. So congrats to the Global Electronics Council and to all the stakeholders that took part in this exercise. I really find that the results are both meaningful and impactful and certainly useful for us purchasers and for us at McGill. So just a few words about McGill University. We are a leading research and academic institution based in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. We have roughly 40,000 students, just under 10,000 staff, and our global supply chain reaches out throughout the world. Obviously, we have 10,000 suppliers, and any given year we can spend roughly between $350 million to $500 million worth of goods, services, and construction works. And we've been involved in sustainable procurement for more than 10 years. And similarly, we've been using the EPEAT ecolabel and buying products that are on the EPEAT registry, mainly silver and gold, for at least 10 years as well. So being involved in sustainable procurement for us and in sustainability involves continuous improvement. And we really value highly when our suppliers and manufacturers throughout our supply chain, when they're also involved in sustainability and they make a genuine effort to improve and generate positive outcomes for communities and for the environment. So here's a quick look at some of the goals that we have as part of our new climate and sustainability strategy. This is the new strategy for 2025-2030. There's many actions and goals in there, but I wanted to highlight a few that I find will benefit from the new EPEAT criteria. So the first one being to achieve carbon neutrality by 2040. So just last year, I had a group of 7 students work with me and a professor, and we tried to quantify our scope 3.1 emissions. Those are the emissions associated with our purchasing of goods and services. And of course, it's a massive footprint. And so for us, knowing that we're working with suppliers that are actively engaged in the quantification and the reduction of their emissions is important. And also when they provide the footprint, the GHG emissions associated with the individual products, that's really useful also for us. We also want to be a nature positive university. So when there was the COP15 in Montreal a few years ago, many universities around the world signed an NPU pledge, a nature positive university pledge, which involves that we want to take care of biodiversity on our campuses and also in our supply chain. So basically, any efforts to reduce toxic release or pollution into the environment, recycling or recycled content of cardboard packaging, for example, which reduces pressure on forests and reduces deforestation. That is also helpful. Every activity that aims to reduce use of water also is positive. So those are important for us. And then becoming zero waste. This is something that we've been considering and working on circularity for a number of years at McGill. For example, we manage our IT assets along circularity principles. We have our own internal reuse loop. We have an external reuse loop with a local nonprofit organization. And then we have our local certified recycler that we work with. But any commitments by suppliers to provide products that will last longer, that are easier to repair, easier to recycle, and manufacturing activities that reduce waste is also very, very valued by us and is important. And it's absolutely something that we look into. We look at manufacturers and suppliers' sustainability reports and what they do and what information they disclose and so on. It's very important. And then lastly here, I wanted to highlight the fact that McGill has a platinum sustainability rating with ASHE stars. And ASHE is the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. And that's a global initiative with many universities around the world that use this system to rank how they're doing in terms of sustainability. And just like any credible sustainability endeavor, it gets stricter and stricter and more ambitious each time. And so we're very proud to be platinum and we want to stay there. And so the reason I'm bringing it up, I'll have a bit more details on the next slide. Being an ASHE Stars, participating in that system, we do that on a voluntary basis, but it requires that we have to report on all of the percentage and of all the electronic spend that we do that meets sustainability criteria. So it has to be based on how many computers, how many servers, all the IT equipment that we buy, and what percentage of that is either EPEAT Gold or EPEAT Silver or has other Type 1 eco labels. And so that's universities everywhere around the world, every 4 years or so, that have to go through this exercise and report on that and try to show, the best purchasing activities that they've had in order to get all the points under the ASHE Star system. So I can just say that many universities in Canada, in the US and in Europe and even elsewhere also participate in this. And so that's a lot of institutions that are interested in purchasing more EPEAT products. So that's on the voluntary side, but on the compliance side, there's other issues that are encouraging us, or not issues, but rather new legislative developments that are encouraging us to buy more sustainable IT equipment. In Quebec, one is the Act respecting contracting by public bodies, which now requires that public organizations, including universities, have to be engaged in sustainable procurement. So that wasn't a big issue for us when it was adopted, when the changes were brought just 2 years ago, because we've been involved in sustainable procurement for a long time. But it sent a bit of a shock to other organizations which were not previously involved in sustainable procurement. And I remember many organizations reaching out and saying, where do we start? What do we do? And I'm like, well, first thing, try to find the most credible eco labels that you can use, and that's like a quick win. And so I remember telling everybody, you should look into the EPEAT eco label, get familiar with the registry, and even so many of us have been using EPEAT for a long time, and now we're actually even in our calls for tenders, now we're even drilling down and looking at individual criteria to see, to incentivize rather, give points, extra points to manufacturers that go above and beyond and that meet more of the optional criteria. So that's really important for us. So that's on the Quebec side. And then in Canada, there's another piece of legislation that is relevant, and that's the Fighting Against Forced Labor and Child Labor in Supply Chains Act. So that requires entities, including large public organizations and businesses, to look at their supply chain and try to fight against forced labor, and they have to report on that each year. So being able to report that this part of our supply chain is covered by this eco label, and that there's these different manufacturers have to abide by a specific code of conduct, and they have to have different audits in their supply chain. That is very reassuring to us, and it helps us reduce risk and helps us in terms of this compliance reporting. Right, so some of the quick wins then from these new criteria. Certainly this is going to help us with our greenhouse gas emissions reductions. It's going to support our energy efficiency goals. Obviously, this is going to support our zero waste initiatives and our circularity objectives as well. And this will help us minimize social risks in our supply chain. And I guess I'll just finish by saying that we're always very interested in knowing how our suppliers are doing in terms of sustainability, and we care to see that they're continuously improving and generating more positive impacts in communities and on the environment. And obviously we need to be able to distinguish, who are the leaders, who's doing what, and that's the only way we can basically bring incentives into the market. So this is a great development. And again, congratulations to the GC and everyone who participated in this. So thank you.
Stephanie, thank you so much. I really appreciate your remarks here, and great bridge, I think, also to talking about the policy angle. So I noted that you talked about the link to Forced Labor in Supply Chains Act and participating in voluntary programs like this and the due diligence that are required in the criteria, being able to show or demonstrate the activities of a responsible technology company, and therefore the procurement arm as well that Stephanie works for and others, that there's a driver for companies to be able to show that they are acting responsibly, not only in their own operations, the products they put out, but the supply chains that they work in as well. So with that, I'm excited to announce Catherine LaRocque, our Director of Eco-Labels and Resources at the Global Electronics Council, and take a deeper dive into what's going on worldwide as it relates to the policy developments in sustainability broadly, but also specifically related to sustainable procurement. With that, Catherine, I'll hand it to you to take away.
Thank you, Bob, and hello, everyone. Next slide, please. I guess while we're getting to the next slide, I am just very excited to be speaking with all of you today about the global ESG policy landscape, especially as sustainability and compliance risks really are taking center stage across government policy in many different regions. To that end, we know that billions of dollars are being mobilized to support the global net zero transition, all while supply chain risks are not only intensifying, but evolving in complexity. Now, GEC is actively engaging in policy development that impacts the realm of sustainable electronics all over the world. But today, I am going to focus primarily on the EU, just given the highly comprehensive and ambitious policy agenda in the region. I am also going to speak to some recent sustainable procurement developments and help you understand why eco-labels like EPEAT continue to be a key enabler of sustainable procurement, and also help to navigate and respond to ESG-related regulatory requirements. Just given the challenges facing global supply chains and the increasing breadth of mandatory sustainability requirements in Europe alone, the value of EPEAT as a trusted, impact-driven market signal really is perhaps stronger than ever before. So while the EU has certainly become a global leader in sustainability by implementing a series of regulations designed to reduce sustainability impacts and promote circular economy principles, the ESG regulatory framework in Europe is also incredibly complex and continually evolving. New ESG policies and regulatory requirements in Europe really can feel like they're coming in almost at a dizzying pace at times. So businesses certainly have a lot to navigate as they try to understand what they need to do to comply. Now, I've listed only a handful of the plethora of sustainability related policy tools and mechanisms in the EU on this slide. But we know, for instance, that the European Green Deal alone, as one example, sets in motion over 100 different directives and regulations that will establish or expand things like clean energy investment, climate tech innovation, supply chain requirements, carbon pricing, sustainability reporting mandates, and many other programs. So please know that the point of this session today is certainly not to dive into any of the policy mechanisms on the screen in any kind of detail, because we would need a lot more time for that. But instead, I do plan to emphasize that what we are entering now, it's really a new era where sustainability actions that were previously voluntary are increasingly becoming mandatory. And this really does represent almost a sea change in how companies think about, deliver, and report on their sustainability efforts. Now, understanding and adapting to these regulatory changes is not just a matter of compliance anymore. It really has become a strategic imperative for organizations, and especially those that want to develop resilient, sustainable supply chains. And to that end, from our perspective, of course, EPEAT does provide an efficient, credible means to drive some of this change, specifically in the electronics industry. Now, it would certainly be remiss of me to discuss EU ESG policy without also acknowledging the recent omnibus legislation. For those of you that might not be familiar, the European Commission published an omnibus package of proposed changes back in February, which effectively marks the start of a process that could result in rather significant changes to key EU laws on sustainability reporting, due diligence, and trade. Under the omnibus, the Commission proposed to make changes to the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, and the EU Taxonomy Regulation. The Commission's proposed changes, of course, they have to go through the legislative process. And for this reason, we really do, unfortunately, just kind of have to wait and see where everything lands. Now, again, I'm not going to cover all of the changes that were proposed today, just given the amount of time that we have. But in general, some of them include things like delaying implementation, reducing the number of companies in scope, and reducing the number of data points. Now, while the omnibus has certainly created some uncertainty and will likely result in shifted deadlines and changing expectations, it certainly doesn't mean that sustainability reporting and due diligence are fading away. In fact, I really love the headline on the center of the slide there that says the best corporate strategy in the face of the omnibus proposal is not to wait and see, but to adapt and lead. Companies that scale back their efforts now could face really costly consequences down the road, especially if you consider, for instance, that many member states have already transposed several of these directives into law and enforcement is underway. So walking back efforts across CSRD, CSDDD, CBAM, or taxonomy would be incredibly risky. And for this reason, we expect to see most companies continue to forge ahead. The EU's commitment to sustainability reporting and supply chain due diligence remains strong, and quite frankly, companies that embrace this will necessarily be more resilient and better positioned for success in this rapidly changing world. The reach of ESG policy in the EU is both expansive and impressive. It regulates environmental marketing claims as well as supply chains and product design, all to ensure that they address material sustainability impacts. It also addresses a whole lot more than that, but that's what we are going to focus on today. Now, what you see on the screen here are just a few examples of EU regulations and directives, that do just that. And importantly for this audience, are relevant to EPEAT and the work that we do at GEC. So the proposed Green Claims Directive and the Empowering Consumers Directive that you see in the green box on the left are examples of EU policy tools that are designed to address sustainability claims in the marketplace. Collectively, the GCD and the ECD will establish strict requirements to ensure that both eco-labels and green claims in the EU are credible. As an example, the proposed Green Claims Directive is expected to require eco-labels to meet a series of requirements and be subject to independent verification so that they become approved before they can even be used. So to this end, GEC is regularly engaged in these policy developments and will ensure that EPEAT continues to meet all requirements for eco-labels in Europe. If we look now at the blue box on the right, these are good examples of directives and regulations designed to increase transparency and overall sustainability of supply chains and products. Eco-design, for instance, will establish criteria to improve the durability, repairability, recyclability, and just overall environmental performance of products across many different product categories. Of interest to EPEAT on this file, of course, is harmonization. So again, we intend to closely follow and provide input on the development of eco-design regulations for electronics. CSRD, on the other hand, it's focused on transparency and accountability throughout the supply chain, while CSDDD requires the identification, prevention, and mitigation of adverse impacts in operations and across supply chains. Now, if you are familiar with EPEAT, you probably know that EPEAT criteria address sustainability impacts deep in supply chains. And for this reason, EPEAT criteria really can help companies understand and identify sustainability impacts as required by these multitude of supply chain regulations in a really comprehensive, methodical way. Now, just to be clear, EPEAT certainly doesn't fulfill regulatory requirements of CSRD or CSDDD on its own, but it is a really useful tool to help companies navigate their own requirements. So in this session, we also promise to share our perspective on broader policy developments that are relevant to EPEAT. So I'm going to change gears just a bit here on this slide and really focus on sustainable procurement. First and foremost, sustainable procurement is certainly thriving and being reinforced by many different policies and initiatives all over the world. And what I'd really like to emphasize here is that credible Type 1 eco-labels like EPEAT, of course, continue to be a key enabler of sustainable procurement globally. We often describe eco-labels as the easy button for purchasers because eco-labels develop criteria to address key sustainability impacts across the life cycle of the product, and we require independent third-party verification of conformance with the criteria. So because we do all of that work, it means that purchasers don't have to become sustainability experts or conduct their own verification. Type 1 eco-labels like EPEAT, they really are powerful, voluntary, market-based tools that can and have transformed industries to become more sustainable because they establish critical mass across global supply chains. And this is why EPEAT is used so extensively as a sustainable procurement tool all over the world. Now, you'll see I included just a few different sustainable procurement highlights from the past year on the slide, and they truly span the globe from Australia and Singapore to South Africa and Latin America. But just to be clear, this is by no means a comprehensive list. Australia is developing an environmentally sustainable procurement policy for ICT goods, and GEC has been deeply engaged in the development of that document, which is expected to take effect on July 1st. Singapore committed to incorporating sustainability considerations into public procurement decisions, and EPEAT is actually referenced as an example of good practice for the ICT sector. South Africa approved a Public Procurement Act in 2024, and while it doesn't make SPP mandatory, it is expected to begin to enable purchasers to implement measures that promote GPP. And the last example I included on the slide is regarding a new multinational eco-label called the Environmental Alliance of America. And that was launched across Latin America last year in response to increased demand for more sustainable products and SPP. Again, there is just so much good work happening in the sustainable procurement space that I've barely scratched the surface on this slide. But I do hope it helps all of you recognize that sustainable procurement is very much alive and well and remains an important demand driver for sustainable electronics, especially. All right, adapting to new sustainability regulations and purchaser specifications around the globe has really driven companies to rethink their supply chains basically from the ground up because they have to verify in many cases that every component from raw materials to finished products comply. In light of this reality, we believe that the value of EPEAT has perhaps never been stronger for both purchasers and manufacturers alike. Now, as I stated on the previous slide, credible Type 1 eco labels like EPEAT are the easy button for purchasers, and to this end, they facilitate and make sustainable procurement more efficient. EPEAT also evolves not only as the science does, but just as importantly with evolving stakeholder expectations. So because EPEAT convenes a diverse global stakeholder community to develop criteria, purchasers can have confidence that diverse stakeholder perspectives are considered, and similarly, manufacturers can be assured that their EPEAT registered products do indeed represent sustainability leadership, even as that definition evolves. As I mentioned earlier, there are several regulations in the EU that will soon require environmental claims to be substantiated and eco labels to be evaluated before they can be used in the market. To this end, EPEAT is an ISO 14024 compliant Type 1 eco-label, and it will fulfill requirements for eco-labels in the EU. So this means that purchasers can rely on EPEAT to procure more sustainable electronics, and manufacturers can confidently make claims regarding their involvement in the EPEAT program. EPEAT also provides a comprehensive framework that manufacturers can leverage to begin mapping their value chains. In other words, it kind of gives them a place to start and a logical way to think about and approach some of the requirements in directives like CSRD and CSDDD. Because EPEAT criteria address impacts deep in the supply chain, and the criteria themselves provide manufacturers an efficient, methodical way to really understand, identify, and assess sustainability impacts across operations and throughout their supply chains. Lastly, participating in EPEAT can also give manufacturers proof points in responding to the CSRD requirements in the EU. Again, while participation in EPEAT does not actually fulfill those regulatory requirements, it does give manufacturers tangible actions to report on under CSRD. We know in its current form, pre-omnibus that is, CSRD has over 1,000 different disclosure data points on items such as climate mitigation actions and outcomes, decarbonization levers, and changes in an organization's product portfolio, etc. So EPEAT can certainly be something that organizations can speak to on these and many other required disclosures. So with that, I hope all of you can now appreciate how participation in EPEAT can really help advance regulatory compliance into a competitive advantage in many ways. It guides companies to understand their supply chains and take concrete actions to address sustainability issues deep within them. And this ultimately makes these organizations more resilient and better able to respond to the plethora of ESG policies all over the world that are impacting sustainable electronics. With that, I'll hand it back to you, Bob.
Excellent. Thank you, Catherine. And just a note on that, because the policy world continues to evolve worldwide, GEC has created a matrix policy team that's going to continue to position EPEAT as a benefit for compliance efforts worldwide for companies, harmonize and build on regulatory efforts, and promote responsible regulation in this space around the globe. Okay, next, thank you, Catherine. Look forward to more of those policy insights in upcoming webinars and face-to-face events. Next, I'm going to introduce Scott O'Connell, who's a Senior Director for Environmental Affairs and Global Producer Responsibility at Dell, to provide the brand or manufacturer perspective on the updated criteria. Scott, welcome, and thanks for coming.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, everybody, for the opportunity to be here today to speak to you. And we're also honored to be here as part of the launch of the new EPEAT standard. As a bit of historical, I was sitting here thinking about we were at the table when the first EPEAT standard was written back, I think, in 2004, 2005, leading to the first launch of the EPEAT registry in 2006. So almost 2 decades partnering with GEC on and the industry on the EPEAT standard as well as the registry. So we're happy to be here and really thrilled about the launch of the new standard that's coming and share some of our perspectives here as I can provide that. So if you go to the first slide, so just to set a little bit of context, as a company, we have set out a set of ambitious climate as well as circular economy goals. We have a really ambitious goal of, as a company, becoming net zero by 2050 across all 3, scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And within that, we have some nearer term goals by 2030 to reduce emissions. You can see the targets there below, but again, very, very focused around climate action as one of our highest sustainability priorities. And then the second one is around circular economy. And we have a set of 2030 goals around recovery of products that we sell into the market, as well as the incorporation of recycled, renewable, and reduced carbon emissions materials across our product portfolio, as well as getting our packaging to be made from 100% recycled renewable material. And all of these goals, as Erica and others talked through earlier, all of our 2050 and 2030 goals have direct linkages into some of the components of EPEAT, the current standard, as well as even more so the new standard that's coming. And so we see this as an opportunity. We see the new EPEAT standard as an opportunity for us to continue to drive and scale our sustainability goals, as well as help our customers meet their goals. So as we march towards achieving these goals, we realize that we're driving sustainable technology and positive outcomes for our customers along the way. So we're really, really proud of that. Maybe as a little bit of context, if you go to the next slide around, where we sit today from an EPEAT perspective is, EPEAT is really a cornerstone eco-label for us, if you will, from a global perspective. And Bob, really appreciate your comments earlier about the global nature of EPEAT, because we see it the same from our adoption of it, the registrations that we have and across the countries we register, as well as our customers. We really see EPEAT as a truly global eco-label. We today have the widest portfolio in the industry. We have the widest portfolio of EPEAT registered products, as well as the Climate Plus designation that was launched almost 2 years ago, back in 2023. So 100% of our commercial notebooks, 100% of our commercial desktops are EPEAT registered, and then 91% of our displays and 80% of our servers are EPEAT registered today. And so we're really proud to see the way EPEAT started really in PCs and displays, and also has expanded into the data center space with servers and possibly other product categories in the future. We're also obviously very tied to the Energy Star program as well here in the U.S. as a key cornerstone energy label, which also is embedded in the EPEAT standards. And then we also secure additional eco labels around the world, like 80 plus TCO and a China environmental label. So we have EPEAT really we view as a global label, and then we have regional labels that are important to our customers in certain countries and regions around the world. So I'll close a little bit with, kind of where we see, if you go to the next slide, where we see ourselves, in the future with the EPEAT standards that are the registry and the standards that are launching later this year is, and this is a bit of a deep dive on Climate Plus, but certainly, we have shown, a legacy of when EPEAT standards changes happen, we launch with them and time to market with them. The last, major change was obviously the Climate Plus module that was launched in 2023, and we jumped on that and registered a large percentage of our products. To over 200 of our products are currently registered to the Climate Plus designation. So we see the new EPEAT standard coming as a way to bring all 4 of those modules to the market at the same time in a launch that will happen this November. So we intend to be time to market with that launch, as well as rolling out the new EPEAT standard across our product portfolio as that new standard launches. So we're excited to be there. We've been again at the table in helping shape and participate in the standards development of this, which I know a number of you have been part of that. So congratulations to everyone that went through that process and here today to celebrate the launch of it. And now looking forward to the registering products and actually getting the new standard into the market. So thanks again for the opportunity to be here. We're excited about the new standard coming. And Bob, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Scott. And as always, as we went through not only updated criteria development, but also continuing discussions on the policy and regulatory space and the future of sustainable procurement, having industry at the table is vital for us. We treat our entire community as equals, and we look at this as a collaborative effort to move forward. And really thank you, Scott, for your perspective here today, and looking forward to more work with you in the future. With that, there's a bridge to Susan Herbert, our VP of Eco Labels and Manufacturer Resources, to talk about more broadly what's next for manufacturers and their suppliers. So Susan, shed some light on this for us. Thank you.
Hey, great. Thank you, Bob. And hello, everybody. So pleased to join you here today. There was so much work done by the expert ad hoc groups and the technical committees to get us where we're at now. Thank you again to all the individuals that contributed to this incredible achievement. And we are so excited to continue with implementation, to have products that meet the updated criteria actually appear in the EPEAT registry. And we're going to touch on how GEC is investing in the resources and support needed to continue moving forward. So our implementation timeframe has been published for a while now, but we wanted to provide a quick reminder of the dates and how the schedule was designed to achieve a balance of multiple goals. As we heard from Erica earlier, we know the updated criteria represent leadership in the priority sustainability impact areas that are most pressing today. Purchasers, investors, policymakers, and the brands themselves all want to make advancements in these areas sooner rather than later. That's why on November 1st, 2025, products meeting the updated criteria will begin to appear in the EPEAT registry. But we also know the complexity of product development cycles. In some cases, these are multi-year processes where things like material selection and product design elements need to be addressed at the beginning of the development process. For some product types that'll be EPEAT registered in, say, December of this year, their development journey began years ago, and they were designed to meet the existing criteria. We've also heard that everyone's desire is to have product availability on the registry when the updated criteria launch in order to meet procurement needs. So to balance these two things, participating brands may still register products against the existing criteria until July 1st, 2026. Remember, for some products, their design journey started years ago, and this will help achieve a populated registry for procurement. The registry will therefore show products meeting the existing criteria and the updated criteria until July 1st, 2027. And EPEAT registry users will easily be able to see and search by which products meet which criteria. As of July 1st, 2027, only those products meeting the updated criteria will actively appear in the registry. We know that the brands participating in EPEAT are already working towards the updated criteria, and they're working with their conformity assurance bodies to demonstrate conformance with these criteria. And we are doing all that we can to continue supporting these efforts. We produce a conformity requirements and guidance document for each of the updated criteria, together with data collection templates for the brands. We conduct training with the approved conformity assurance bodies and make recordings of these trainings available for the brands. We hold regular meetings with stakeholders to gather feedback on the more technical questions that arise, and we're always available to discuss any questions or issues that arise with implementation of the criteria. We are working with our development team to transform the registry to align with the updated criteria. And this includes both the back end, where the brands enter their information and have it approved by the conformity assurance bodies, and the front end where registry users search for EPEAT registered products. And finally, we recognize that the criteria are harder and go deeper into the supply chain. So we're investing in supplier resources to help educate the supply base on what EPEAT requirements mean for them and what their clients, the EPEAT participating brands, need. And you'll hear a bit more about that from Kaushik in a few minutes. So just to touch on one last thing that we are doing to help ensure the successful transition. The week of April 14th, we will be holding webinars for participating brands and for GEC approved conformity assurance bodies. The webinars will be held in multiple time zones to make it easier for people in different locations to attend, but they will address the same topics, and you can see the list of the topics on the screen. So in addition to providing reminder on some of the key transition elements, we're also going to provide a sneak preview of what the back-end intake screens and the registry are going to look like, and the schedule for registry beta testing and further details on support of the supply base. So in the next week, participating brands and GEC approved conformity assurance bodies will receive a direct invitation to sign up for one of these sessions. So with that, Bob, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Susan. I'll do a quick transition here, just looking at the time, to Kaushik Ramakrishnan, our Vice President of Global Market Development, to talk about the other side of the equation. So taking a look at the demand side as it relates to sustainable product development and sales. So Kaushik, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Could we go to the next slide, please? Susan kind of teed us up to talk about how GEC is working to support the participating manufacturers and the OEMs and the brands in adopting the updated EPEAT criteria. But I also want to take a slightly broader look at several other stakeholder groups that GEC is actively engaged with, which you can see at a very high level on this slide. One thing that we're doing, starting from the bottom of the slide, is making sure that the supply base is well supported and is well resourced to be able to update the updated criteria. So this includes, of course, all of the things that Susan just talked about, but particularly also works with engaging the supply base of the brands and supply base of the manufacturers to help them implement the updated EPEAT criteria. And I'll talk about this in just a moment. But we're also looking at the middle tier, which are these circles in orange, which I refer to as the enabling environment, which involves policymakers and civil society. We heard a little bit from Catherine earlier about the evolving policy landscape, and GEC is actively engaged at different levels in North America, in Europe, in Asia Pacific on the policy side of things to make sure that there are right structures to promote sustainable ICT and sustainable ICT procurement. We're also actively engaged with investors and with the rating agencies and other actors in the capital markets domain so that we create the right incentives and create the right financial structures and financial motives to uptake sustainable technology, both on the demand and supply side. And we also quite actively work with retailers and distributors who really connect supply with demand. And GEC has an active retailer engagement program that works with retailers around the world to support them in connecting supply and demand for EPEAT registered products. And then, of course, on the top, the green bubbles, the green circles refer to the demand drivers. And these are the drivers that really keep the market-based wheel turning, so to speak. And GEC actively engages with institutional purchasers, both in the public and private sector that we've heard a little bit about earlier in this presentation. And we are also cognizant of kind of the ripple effect that institutional purchasers or institutional demand for sustainable electronic product can have on retail demand for sustainable electronic products. If you could go to the next slide, please. And what I'll do over the next 3-4 minutes is talk about two of these bubbles, not necessarily getting into all of them. The first one being specifically the suppliers of or the other organizations that are in the supply chain of major electronic brands. Now, if you look at a laptop or a mobile phone or a server, these have highly complex supply chains, can often involve hundreds of different organizations that come together to get this product manufactured and delivered to our doorsteps. And given that the EPEAT updated criteria now goes deeper into the supply chain and raises the bar in terms of what is required of organizations in the supply chain, GEC wants to make sure that this transition can happen in a way that's smooth and these organizations can be supported in making that transition. And that's why GEC has kind of behind the scenes been working on a supplier engagement program, which we're in the final stages of putting together and should be launching in the coming weeks. But this is a program specifically to work with the supply chain of electronic manufacturers. So this could be, working with a major OEM in their supply chain, or working directly with, key organizations in the supply chain of one of these OEMs. These could include contract manufacturers, which range from, organizations that just do the design to organizations that produce end-to-end a white label product, but all the entire range of contract manufacturers, the entire range of component suppliers, from semiconductors and microprocessors to PCBs to memory and storage devices and so on, which are key components going into electronic devices, and a whole other host of supply chain service providers. And the way we're looking to engage with them is through a combination of training services, a combination of advisory services, and a combination of tools and resources and templates so that they're well resourced to be able to adapt the updated criteria. And all of these services and tools will help these organizations, first of all, understand and map the updated EPEAT criteria to, how it applies to them. And this is, both the mandatory criteria, which are going deeper into the supply chain, as well as several optional criteria that go deeper into the supply chain. And it's important for organizations in the supply chain to understand which criteria apply to them and how they should be mapping towards it. So there's work that we do to support the OEMs and their suppliers on this front. And then there's a key component of the supplier engagement program is capability development, making sure that the organizations understand what they need to do, they understand how they need to adapt their systems or processes to meet new requirements, to make sure that they have the right tools and templates and so on to capture evidence and data to show compliance against the updated criteria. So this is a whole set of capability development, training, guidance, and tools on that front. And finally, we want to make sure that the organizations, the supply chains, also have strong incentives to do so. So to support them in getting recognition for their efforts, recognition within the market, recognition with their own customers, which is often a big electronics brand. So how do we make sure that the supply chain that's putting in all this effort gets the recognition that it deserves for the work that they're doing? If we can go to the next slide, please. So this is a summary of the supplier engagement program. More to come on this. But let me quickly switch over to another community that we want to make sure that we're actively supporting. This is the purchasing community, the institutional purchasing community, which includes large public purchasers in the EU, in Asia Pacific, in South America, in North America, in Canada, and the US. So a very global base of purchasers. And we want to be supporting them through many different channels, one of them being information and thought leadership. We heard Susan talk about a webinar that's coming up for manufacturers, but there is also a range of, or a series of webinars that we're planning on several key topics in the updated criteria that would be of relevant or interest to purchasers. We understand that a lot of purchasers use EPEAT in many different ways to address many different aspects of their own sustainability strategies and their own circularity goals. And we want to make sure that they can understand how EPEAT can be embedded into doing so for lifetime extension of products, for managing your scope 3 emissions footprint, for addressing emerging topics like chemicals of concerns and PFAS and so on. So stay tuned. We'll share more information on this with you. But we're also, as some of you may have already seen, invites in your email, some of the purchasers may have already seen this. We're also doing more focused webinars or focused meetings with purchasing organizations and purchasing groups, so that you have the opportunity to dive a little bit deeper and to answer questions and so on. And in tandem with this, we're also updating other resources on our websites. We have a number of purchaser guides and case studies and so on, but we're making sure these get updated, and these can be resources that are relevant in the context of the updated criteria. So stay tuned for these, and we'll make sure to keep you all informed as and when these are available and ready. The next kind of channel through which we're supporting the purchasing communities through a number of tools and policies and policy resources. We heard Scott talk about the commitment that Dell has to producing climate, EPEAT Climate Plus designated products, but we're also looking at the flip side to make sure that there is demand and incentives in the market for these Climate Plus products. So we have what's called as a Climate Plus purchasing pledge. You can be a purchasing leader or a purchasing advocate and pledge towards integrating EPEAT and Climate Plus specific policies in your procurement policy. And this is a pledge that has been growing over the years. There are a number of organizations across the world, both from public and private sector, who have committed to this pledge. And please feel free to reach out to anyone at GEC if your organization wants to explore this a little further. And for doing all this work on embedding EPEAT into your policies, on doing the work to put demand behind or adapt demand to the requirements of EPEAT criteria, we also want to make sure that the purchasing community gets opportunities to measure their impact and get recognized for this impact that they're able to deliver. The EPEAT's benefit calculator is, of course, being updated to accommodate the updated criteria. And we have the long-running Purchaser Awards program, which a number of purchasers have participated in over the years. The infographic over here shows the Purchaser Award impact from last year, but we are in the process of accepting applications for the Purchaser Awards in 2025. This is, of course, a rolling process, and we accept applications all through the year, but we're at the moment accepting applications specifically for the award ceremony, which will be in July, I believe, of this year. So please, again, feel free to check out our website or reach out to anyone at GEC or myself at GEC if you're an organization that wants to get recognized for all the great work that you do, which I think is my last slide. So, I just want to conclude saying a lot of progressive purchasers have adopted EPEAT in their policies to address a number of their own needs, a number of their own sustainability strategies and circularity strategies. So please feel free to reach out to us and talk about how you can join your progressive purchasing peers in creating impact and getting recognized for this impact. But with that, if you can go to the next slide, I'd like to hand it back to Bob.
Okay, thanks, Kaushik. A lot of content here, we understand. And so this will be recorded and available for playback, but we're also questions as well. And so we'll try to address some of those today. We might not have enough time to get through all of them. But first, I just want to take a step back and acknowledge again those that contributed to the next generation criteria for EPEAT. Big, massive lift, massive effort across a number of different categories. But as you saw on that slide, so many people and organizations gave significant amount of effort, blood, sweat, and tears went into this, and we couldn't be more grateful. We think it's not only a moment in time, but it provides the foundation, we think, for the evolution of EPEAT. We're driving forward on additional product categories individually, but there are broader strategies involved here, including a deeper foray into digital infrastructure, including data centers. The spike in data centers related to AI growth and crypto growth, as just one example, is going to make the services we buy, the cloud services we buy, even more hungry for resources, water, carbon, waste. And so taking a focus on where we're headed from not only a hardware perspective, but an ecosystem in the digital infrastructure is going to be very important for the future of our work with you. And then in addition, looking at pervasive electronics, driving forward and taking a look into different industries that use electronics, whether it be screens and hard drives, or semiconductors, or a variety of other components, within their products that are similar and made in the same factories as those in traditional IT products. That's right for work, right? If we're really working towards a vision of 100% sustainable technology, we have to address that space, and you provided the foundation for that. With that, I also want to acknowledge those public servants, in the U.S. federal government that provided the foundation decades ago within the EPA, and then also the government agencies that promoted sustainable procurement over the years, and those in other jurisdictions, other countries throughout the world that have been fundamental for taking the seeds of EPEAT and growing them all over the world. More to come. If I could see the next slide real quick. To celebrate, we do have a reception this evening. It's called the EPEAT Next Chapter Reception at Girard Street Kitchen, which is located in the Darcy Hotel in Washington, D.C. We've been sending out lots of emails on this. If you haven't had the opportunity to see this and you're in the DC area tonight, please stop by. You can give me or any of our staff, drop us a line, and we'll make sure that you get all the details you need. But here's some of the details on the screen. We look forward to celebrating. And with this will also double as a goodbye or sort of farewell, I guess, to Patty Dillon, who was instrumental in getting the updated criteria across the line. She's retired from GEC most recently, although she is doing some executive advising work back with us. So thank you, Patty, for all your hard work in this. And we look forward to raising a glass to you this evening.